Welcome to IT Visionaries, created by The Mission, your number one source for accelerated learning.
Welcome to IT Visionaries. This is Ben Wilson, a producer here at mission.org. This episode features a very special guest, Marissa Meyer. Marissa is an extremely successful technologist and businesswoman. She is a co-founder of Lumi Labs and formerly served as the president and CEO of Yahoo. She was also employee number 20 at Google and was a longtime executive and key spokeswoman there. In this exclusive interview, Marissa discusses the early days of Silicon Valley, the lessons she learned from Google and Yahoo, and her best tips for time management and productivity. Unfortunately, our regular host, Ian Faison, was out of the studio for this one, so it was conducted by Mission CEO Chad Grills. Enjoy.
IT Visionaries is brought to you by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce. The Lightning Platform is a leading cloud platform that makes building AI-powered apps faster and easier. With Salesforce, now everyone is empowered to build apps for their organization. Learn more at salesforce.com/buildapps.
Marissa, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So when people ask what you do now, how do you answer that?
Well, I have a new startup, Lumi Labs, and we're working on building out products. We've hired about 12 people, and we're on our way. So it's fun to be a first-time entrepreneur after all these years.
I love it. So you are doing startup labs that's focused on media and the future of AI. Is that how you would describe it, or?
Lumi Labs is a working title. We're essentially founding a company, but we want to have a deliberate period of experimentation where we try a lot of different things and we see what we really get excited about, what our friends and family and limited betas get excited about, and then we will ultimately release a product coming out of that. And a lot of the areas that we're very interested in, they all have to do with applying AI to everyday tasks, but mostly media tasks.
I like that. So when people are asking you right now, what are you excited about in Lumi Labs? Is there anything you can share specifically maybe?
Sure. I mean, we're looking a lot at how do people relate to each other, and how can you make the act of connecting with someone actually more frictionless?
I like that a lot. So Lumi Labs and media and AI and machine learning, these are topics that you've been focused on and learning about for 20 years maybe? Or
yeah, my degrees at Stanford were both in artificial intelligence. So
symbolic systems and computer science?
Symbolic systems and computer science, but I did specializations in AI in both.
With your time at Stanford and everything you were learning, was there a particular teacher or moment that kind of turned you on to machine learning and AI? Or
I think there were a lot of phenomenal teachers, but I would say that for me, I came to Stanford thinking I was going to be a neurosurgeon. And then when I got into the program, I realized that my interest in the brain actually was a lot more in how it learned. How do people learn? How do they reason? How do they express themselves? And it was a lot less about just the physicality of what does this part of the brain do? What does that part of the brain do? How do you solve ailments in it? And so I started looking at, what were some things that Stanford did particularly well and were really unique to the Stanford experience. And I came across this major symbolic systems that really was captured in this interdisciplinary major, exactly what I was interested in.
Sure. So when people talk about machine learning now, do you feel like it's overhyped? For instance, people call everything AI that's not really AI. Do you have a bone to pick with those folks? Or do you generally think that more interest, more hype in the space is a good thing? Where do you weigh in on that?
I think that it is important to understand that systems have to learn to be intelligent, or ML, machine learning.
Algorithms can't be called AI.
It just can't be the case that it's smart.
Right.
Because there's a lot of algorithms that are profoundly smart, right? Google search, like the fact that it can search over 1 trillion URLs and find the exact one you're looking for, that's almost so smart it's magic.
Sure.
And there are some elements of AI being built into it now, but even back in the early days of Google, there wasn't necessarily classic AI. There was no machine that was learning to do things we hadn't programmed it to do.
Right.
It's just that the exhaustiveness of the breadth of information being searched and the quickness made it seem like it was smart and as if it was learning something. So it's important to have that distinction. I think in terms of AI, the bigger thing that I worry about is there's a lot of people who are working on thinking about projections into the future. What are the moral implications of AI? What would happen if the AI did this or that? And the hypotheticals. And I think it's important to think through those issues because some of them are very weighty. But at the same time, it's also important to realize where the state of the industry and the state of the art is today.
Right.
And we're pretty far from that, at least from my vantage point.
Definitely. It seems like there's so much low-hanging fruit in terms of lives that can be saved or lives that can be improved from machine learning and AI that putting the brakes on it now would be maybe a mistake. So you mentioned the early days at Google. How did you first find the company? How did it first come onto your radar?
I had spent the summer of 1998 working for the Union Bank of Switzerland. And I worked in their research lab. And the researcher I was working with, a gentleman named Matthew Chalmers, was building a technology that looked at where people went on the web. Basically, it was a little companion that sat alongside the browser.
Sure.
And basically did collaborative filtering. So if one user went and visited sites A, B, and C, and later someone visited site B, we would recommend sites A and C, and we would do, all kinds of weighted calculations to come up with the best collaborative filtering. And the bank was interested in this because it helped their traders in the mornings, in theory, come up to speed that much faster
Sure.
in terms of the information. When I came back from Switzerland, I was hired to lecture for the first time. I had been a prolific teaching assistant at Stanford for the introductory programming courses, but I had never taught. So I was lecturing for the first time. Came back, talked to my mentor, Eric Roberts, about it and said, look, I just got back in the country. I'm really excited to teach for the first time. He said, tell me about your research this summer. I told him about the project and he said, oh, wow. He's like, there's these two guys on the 4th floor of Gates building. They're doing what you're doing, except they're not looking at where people go on the web. They're looking at where they could go on the web in terms of the link structure. And they're doing very similar computations. He's like, and they just dropped out to do a startup, and I can't remember what it's called.
That was right at the time where they're transitioning from Backrub to Google? Or
Yeah, and I just said, and I'd give Eric a hard time that he couldn't remember the name Google. But I just said, Eric, I just got back in the country. I'm teaching for the first time. I've got a very full plate. I can't mess around with a startup now, which was actually fortuitous because I think if I had reached out in September of 1998 when we were having that conversation, it would have been way too early for Google. They were just getting started and established with the company.
Bit chaotic, maybe.
And I'm probably not ready to hire a new grad or take someone on who could only work part-time, et cetera. And then fast forward to April, I was busy in my job hunt and got an email from one of the early Googlers who had gotten a list of graduating students that they should talk to from one of the professors at Stanford. And my name was on that list. So he said, you're one of the people that I'm told that we should be talking to. And when I read the description of the company, I was like, wait, this is that company. This is that company that Eric talked to me about. So even though I had, it was the height of the bubble, first internet bubble, and I had lots and lots of job offers, I remember thinking that company sounded interesting even back then when Eric couldn't remember the name.
Sure.
And so I should make time to go talk to them now.
How was the climate and culture? How did it view startups at that time? Was that something that was a popular thing to do, or were people encouraging you in that direction, or did you get a lot of pushback when you wanted to join?
I think that it was something where a lot of people who are graduating with computer science degrees, it was sort of expected that at some point they'd go to a startup.
Right.
In fact, I even remember I was debating between, in the end, Google and McKinsey, and also a teaching offer at Carnegie Mellon, et cetera. And as I was looking at the different opportunities, there was one point when I was talking to Eric Roberts about it, and he said, in this day and age, given the internet and everything that's happening and the way startups have really come back and are, to the forefront with Yahoo and et cetera, all really leading the charge. He's like, no one would be surprised if you went to a startup. And if you wanted to have that experience,
right,
you're the most technical, you're going to be now, right after you graduate. And so, this might be, if you want to do the startup thing, now is kind of the time or a great time to do it.
It sounds like sage advice. Not all of us are that lucky. Sometimes we are. Sometimes we work hard enough to get a mentor like that. How has mentorship like that been a part of your career, been a part of your life?
For me, I would say my path on mentorship has been very organic. Over the course of my career, I've been approached by people, and sometimes they'll be very overly formal. Will you be my mentor? Right. And try and structure meetings and put a lot of structure around it. And to me, I've always at any given time had several mentors kind of helping me on different facets
Sure.
of what I want to be working on or growing in. And it's always been related to the task at hand,
Right.
as opposed to just like, somebody at a different company or in a completely different time or place, helping and or being someone who you can bounce ideas off of. So I personally think that, the right mentors often present themselves.
Right.
And as the mentee, you need to do the work.
Right.
And really, make sure that you're asking good questions and setting things up to have a lot of
things
learnings.
up in the perfect.
Well, to have a lot of good learnings from that mentor's experience.
Sure.
But I'm not necessarily dogmatic about how you approach mentorship.
So was there a moment or early story from Google that you've never shared before that in looking back on it, you kind of view that as the inflection moment when you decided to really go all in, or maybe it was clear how big Google was going to be? Was there a single moment like that or anything you can look back on?
I don't know. I mean, like it was fast and furious at the time in terms of work on the startup. I will say, I remember I negotiated for my offer, got my offer, had to sign it quickly because I told myself I would decide by May 1st. And then when I couldn't get to an answer, I gave myself an extension. I was like, okay, I've got to really, decide something quickly. And in that whole thing, I knew I wanted to teach at Stanford that summer. I'd already been hired to teach a summer course. And I knew that I wanted to go to Europe and backpack for a little bit. And so I negotiated with Larry and Sergey to go backpacking for 2 months in the fall. And that changed my offer. And then of course, in the frenzy of a startup, that 2-month backpacking trip never happened. There was always too much to do. And instead I took about a 2-week trip, or maybe a week and a half trip. And on that trip, I was in Zurich because I went back to see some of my friends that I had done research with the previous year. And when I was there, I went into a cyber cafe and I saw someone using Google. And at first, you walk past it and it's almost like seeing someone with your university logo and sweatshirt. Like when you're at that university, you see it all the time. And then you're like, wait, but we're not there. What is it doing here?
Yes.
Where I was so used to seeing the Google homepage and the Google results page at first. I was like, and then I was like, wait, I'm in Switzerland. This person's using this little project that we're working on half a world away. That's when I realized really how quickly a product that worked really well could scale and how quickly and how fast its reach could grow. Did you share that story with Larry and Sergey when you came back? Yes. I mean, I talked about it with them extensively when we got back, because basically we knew that, search was basically second on the internet only to mail in terms of overall usage. And basically over time, it's been about 1 in every 20 pages or so that people view on the web happens to be a search results page. So about 5% of the time people are searching when they're on the internet. But the fact that they were using us to search was actually noteworthy. So I wasn't surprised to see a search up on in the cyber cafe of 20 computers. You'd expect at least one screen to have search results on it. That, But it was surprising that it was our search results. Yeah, that's really, really cool to hear. So at what point in Google's trajectory were you probably most overwhelmed? Is there, because with startups, people get stressed, people get overworked. Was there a moment like that for you? And how did you get past it? How did you fix things, or maybe, reorient yourself maybe? I don't know if it was really a reorientation, but I do remember, there were lots of periods where things were a lot of hard work. Right. But I do remember we had gotten the Netscape contract the day before I started. And then about a year later, we managed to land the Yahoo contract. And at the same time... Just real quick for people that might not be up to speed with that. So the Netscape contract, that was the first licensing contract, the first big one? Right, where basically Google would be one of 5 search engines offered in its rotation, in its search center. And the next year, basically Yahoo was the biggest internet site by far. And they swapped from Inc. to me powering them to Google. So we were basically, this was victory. A major victory for us and a big shot for us. Simultaneously, because we weren't even sure if we'd be able to get the Yahoo contract, it was something we courted for that entire year. We also had been trying to create the world's largest search index. And we had been crawling 1 billion pages. Of books, right? Or not of books, of actual web pages. Okay, but for comparison, the previous summer, our index had about 30 million pages. Gotcha. So we were basically, we had grown the index and the capabilities of our crawler and our algorithms by about 30x, let alone with the traffic increases, because actually, there's 2 dimensions of growth, right? One, we're growing the index, the other is we're growing users. And so then it basically came to pass that we were like, okay, we're going to launch the Yahoo partnership and what we called the Giga Index, the billion-page index, on the same day with 2 press releases on the wire. And it basically meant that we all were there and we didn't leave the office for about 4 days.
Wow.
Leading up to it. And we barely had time to sleep. We were like, sleeping in shifts. And like when you're doing like strategic sleeping where you're like, you can be asleep for these 2 hours, but not those 2 hours, like, it's rough. And the morning of the launch, it was back in the day when you actually loaded up press releases on the wire.
Sure.
And so the PR team had loaded up the 2 press releases the night before. They were going out at 6 a.m. that Google had a billion-page index and that Google had won the Yahoo partnership. And at about 4 a.m., we realized we had 2 data centers, one West Coast, one East Coast. And we had everything prepared on the West Coast. But then we needed to be able to serve Yahoo's traffic out of our East Coast data center, which meant we needed to do a cache fill to make our search snappy. But we'd fill the cache by doing basically a load test and hitting it with a lot of queries from the West Coast. Or we needed to be able to serve our new big index out of the East Coast. And the problem is that both of them were going to use our cross-country bandwidth. So we actually had to make a choice. Like, basically, we could either fill the cache and meet our obligations to Yahoo and sort of hopefully fulfill our promise in terms of having really fast search, or we could have the billion-page index there, and the 6 a.m. press releases presumed that both would be true, and there wasn't enough time and enough bandwidth available on that link to do it. I was so tired. We had moved into this office that weirdly had a women's sauna in one of the women's locker rooms. And since I hadn't slept in so long, I thought, okay, maybe if I just go and relax in the sauna for 10 minutes, even though it's not really sleep, I'll feel like I've slept and be a little bit more revived for this long day ahead. So I remember I went in, I set like a 10-minute timer to be in the sauna. And about 7 minutes in, someone came and got me and they said, like, look, we've discovered this problem. Like, we can't do both cache fill and the index transfer. Like, there's just not enough capacity. We've got to get founder input on this.
Right.
And Larry had gone home to be ready for press interviews and everything that was undoubtedly going to come the next morning. Sergey was there overseeing the development and the execution of all this the night before. He had gone to sleep under his desk. It's like I had to go and like wake Sergey up at 4 a.m. I was like, okay, like which one? Because we can't make them both true. I remember that was like a really intense moment where it was ambitious. And by about noon, we had gotten both of them done.
Sure.
But as we went live at 6 a.m, we had the cache fill completed, so our search stayed fast, but we copied the billion-page index over the next 4 to 6 hours.
That's exciting to say the least. So it sounds like you had a world-class technical team. Was that fair to say at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, we had a tremendous technical talent.
Was it a situation where, despite that expertise in terms of technical talent, that you still needed to learn things that nobody knew about yet? Because you're kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of different fields there, where the future is being written as you go. So was that a situation where you were trying to learn all this stuff as you went, or was it like, no, we know how to do everything?
No, I mean, there were definitely times when we were inventing new things. Like, we had set up our data centers so differently than other companies. Everyone else was using these big mainframes. Mm-hmm. We were buying off the shelf computers, pulling the boxes off them, loading them into racks, and basically running in a single refrigerator-sized box, about 80 different computers. And that has all the kinds of problems with heat, with power, with all kinds of elements on it. And interestingly, because of the setup, we also needed really big switches. So we would go to Cisco with our spec for what we needed in terms of a switch, and they'd be like, what are you doing? Like, who needs this? And we were like, wait, like, we really do need this, right? And so that was there was a lot of amazing work done early course of Google, because there were a lot of things that had to be invented. If you think of it as a search engine, not as a search engine, but as like a steam engine, mm-hmm. But our traffic from those early days would grow like 100,000 times over. Our index would grow not in the span of a year 30 times over, but in the span of the rest of the time, like 30,000 times over. And so if you think of it as an actual engine, it was an engine where in the course of 5 years, it had to work millions of times harder and be millions of times more efficient. And so those kinds of leaps in optimization, in compute power and capabilities, in how you handle the data and what's in memory, right? And all the different techniques. There were tons of things that were invented, on the technical side, MapReduce, and, a lot of the different things that are now industry standard and taught everywhere,
Right.
sharding data. Those were things that there were a lot of early internet pioneers that were all dealing with those things, but a lot of the now disciplines of them were actually defined by some of the early technical work at Google.
Fascinating. So when you're on the cusp of new industries and you're creating and inventing, it's not the easiest thing to maintain composure and be wonderful and have a nice, kind and caring culture. Sometimes you have to be abrupt, and sometimes you have to tell people like it is. You have to be honest with your feedback. And in the New York Times article that came out, you mentioned that Larry and Sergey weren't afraid to raise their voice if they needed to with certain people in certain situations. Do you feel like Silicon Valley has kind of has lost that, or maybe turns their nose up at that a little bit?
I don't, because I think that, in the world of startups, it just makes good sense.
Sure.
Right? You have a scarcity of resources, you have a real scarcity of time. And I think in those moments, you don't necessarily think of it as being rude or
Right.
ill-mannered. It's just a matter of that, to actually get everything done that needs to get done.
Because the stakes are so high.
You need to be concise.
Sure.
And so I think that in the world of startups and in the world of fast-moving technology, people are pretty forgiving around that, which isn't to say, I would say that, Google always had a very respectful culture, which
Right.
I'm really grateful for. There was always a lot of respect in all directions.
Their culture is amazing. My wife works there today, by the way. It's fantastic.
And it was always a great culture, but no one took offense at the fact that someone spent 2 minutes explaining why the answer was no as opposed to 15.
So as Google is starting to hit rocket ship growth and there's an IPO in the future, trying to get my timeline right here, but there's the Sequoia investment. I think a year later, there's the Yahoo investment and then IPO. Is that roughly?
No, it's funny because we felt like we were the grandfatherly IPO because
Gotcha.
what happened was we took the Sequoia and the Kleiner Perkins investment the same month that I started.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
then the next year when Yahoo selected us as their search engine, they put some money into the company.
Okay.
And then when we renewed the contract the next year, I think they put some more money into the company along with some other investors. But we didn't go public until 2004.
Okay.
And so basically it took about 6 years, which in startup world, either, in 1999, either you were going public in 18 months to 2 years or you weren't going to. But what happened to us was, and at the time it was scary, but it became healthy, is, we experienced that first bubble burst. March of 2000, tons of startups go out of business. Yahoo's market cap takes this huge plunge, right? There's kind of memes, you just hear it in passing on television shows or movies, the web is dead, or the web died this month.
Sure.
And, and through all of that, it really meant that for a long time, the door was closed. And, we had to do a really good job running the company in a way that was frugal, in a way that was really focused on getting to cash flow positive and profitable. And it meant that our IPO was suppressed, which I would say was actually a good thing because it allowed us to be focused on the quality of the product, the quality of the business. And then when we ultimately hit the 500 shareholder rule that caused us to have to go public, or at least to be reporting publicly, even if we didn't take an investment.
Right.
We had a lot of time where we were really inwardly focused. And I will say, there were a lot of us who were worried about going public, where you're wait, you don't want the stock ticker to affect the employee's mood.
Right.
Right. You don't want to feel wait, we actually just released a great feature, but our stock was down today and our competitor's stock was up. Does that mean it wasn't great, right? You don't want to have a signal.
It's a huge distraction.
It's a big distraction, but also it's noisy.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a trailing indicator by definition. And so you don't want people making decisions on really forward-looking things
Right.
based on the mood of a trailing indicator.
Right. I think Bezos talks a lot about this, where the work he does today or the stock price today is reflected on work they did 4 years ago or something along those lines. But good to keep in mind.
But for us, it was nice because we had been able to be very inwardly focused for a long time and not had that distraction. And even then, once we did go public, Larry and Sergey were very careful, and Eric were very careful to set the tone that it was a financing event for the company. And they didn't really want to change the way it operated, to the point where Sergey didn't even attend the IPO in New York. he made a point of staying in Mountain View and going and visiting engineers in their cube and asking them about their projects.
That's a strong statement. I really love that story. So your final role at Google was you were running Maps and Geo, or was that department
over the course of the years, I moved into product management, ran the search business and related products for about 10 years. And then at the end, I moved into running Maps and Local and all geo-related services.
Which is a massive business unit now at Google. Geo's kind of starting to be a rocket ship.
Even then it was. There were about 12,000 people at Google. About 1,000 of them were in geo in terms of full-time
I didn't realize
employees.
There was that many then.
And then we also had the Street View drivers, which they're part-time contractors, but there's like, at the time, there were like 6,000 or 7,000 Street View drivers. So there was this, ultimately a many thousand person division.
When did you decide or start to think about leaving Google for the next adventure?
I didn't. So the next, Yahoo presented itself to me. I got a call from a headhunter, and I thought that it was the same recruiter who had put me on the Walmart board. And so I thought he was just calling for like the cursory, like, congratulations, you've been voted onto the board. It's finally happened. And he was like, by the way, he's like, I'm not calling about Walmart. I'm calling about a different opportunity where your name has come up. And, and he talked to me a lot about the company. And it's funny because a lot of people had pointed out to me that it would be an interesting opportunity for me, but I was really scared to raise my hand for a lot of reasons because, Yahoo seemed from the outside as a place that really didn't necessarily know itself and what it wanted to do and what it wanted to be, particularly in terms of the board directions, but also because I was really happy at Google. And I was working on really interesting things. And, I was quite happy to stay there. At the time, also, when I got that phone call, I was 24 weeks pregnant. And I was like, look, like, I've got a bunch of different projects, including like Google Maps on iPhone and things like that are all scheduled to basically launch like the month before my baby comes. And like, I'm just going to get all these projects launched, like have my baby, be on a nice long maternity leave, come back, figure out what I want to do next year at Google. Like, I didn't have any idea I would be leaving, especially then. Like I had my whole plan kind of locked and loaded already in terms of how I wanted to handle it and what I wanted to do. I hadn't necessarily disclosed it at work yet. But that said, I felt like the Yahoo opportunity was so special that I had to consider it. And I heard myself, it's kind of funny because he described this company and I thought it was a different company that had also been looking for a CEO, and I had gotten several calls from them earlier. And I just said like, no, not interested, no, not interested. So I said, oh, I think I know what company you're talking about, and no, I'm not interested. And he was like, well, it's Yahoo. And I was like, oh, it's Yahoo. I was like, he's like, are you interested? And I was like, yes. And it was so funny because he was like, really? And I was like, yes, I'm really interested. So
yeah, that's the type of thing you don't tell somebody yes unless you're very, very serious about it.
But I mean, it's one of those like out of body experiences where I heard myself say yes and then be like, yeah, like it is something I've always had a lot of respect for Yahoo. I was really grateful to the role it played in the early internet, the role it played particularly at Google. But the friends I had worked there over the year were incredible technologists and also just really nice people.
Yeah.
I love, just separate from technology, I love art. And I talked to a gallery owner I really respect once, and I said, who do you bring into your gallery? And one of the things he said is he's like, I always bring in nice people. And his theory was, he's like, well, one, life is too short to work with people who aren't nice. But two, he's like, for an artist, you feel their mood and their temperament in the work. And I think the same thing is true of technologies.
Definitely.
Right? If the person is unhappy or not that thoughtful about people,
the emotion gets translated into the media,
it actually gets
into
translated into the product in terms of the way it does things and the feedback it gives the user. And you could just tell by using Yahoo that the people there were really nice and like had a lot of fun and joy. Right? They had a real joie de vivre, as they said, as they would say. And I really, I'd always respected that about the company.
So you decided to make the leap. When you got there, what did you find? What was the first maybe couple weeks like?
I would say, it was exhilarating to be there because it was a lot of the problems I had always worked on. It was search, it was email, it was maps, it was mobile, there were social components. It was a lot of the stuff I had worked on at Google, but it was an entirely new context with new people, new advantages, new disadvantages. And I just really love atmospheres where you learn that much.
Yes.
Right. And so I was like learning so much in such an intense period of time. And I was like, And in all truthfulness, I probably wasn't as good at it, right? Like at Google, there were so many things that had just come up over the years in such a base of knowledge that, maybe there was a course of the day I could handle like 100 things coming up and just know exactly what to do next on all of them. At Yahoo, it was slower going, right? It might be more like 25 or 30 things that were coming up in any given day. But, learning something new with each and every decision, each and every conversation, which I really loved that. So I was really very excited about Yahoo. And also, I like design, and I take a very broad view of design, because some people would say, oh, you mean like the design of chairs and modern furniture? No, I think of design broadly as like design problems, design thinking.
Sure.
And trying to come in, take Yahoo, say, okay, like there's a lot that works about this company and there's a lot that doesn't work about this company. How can I design a team, a product portfolio, an ultimate setup where we can really thrive? Was the biggest, hardest, and most interesting design problem I've ever got to work on.
So when you're working on what sounds like a very, very difficult design problem, are you referring to books? Are you referring to experts? How are you putting together your team of rivals, that proverbial team to handle it?
You're relying a lot on experience. You're relying a lot on the people who are there. One of the things I said is that, well, I got there and on a second, they said, when will your strategic kickoff meeting be? Because remember, I was the 7th CEO in 61 months.
Wow.
So like the people there were just totally used to like a new CEO rides into town, rolls out the strategic presentation of what they're going to do the next day.
Yeah.
And
everybody's just keeping track of
I said, I'm going to just talk to people and listen for about 90 days. And maybe once I'm about a quarter into it, I'll present my strategy. And I said, because look, like there's a lot of very smart, talented people here who've been here for a long time. If solving Yahoo's problems and finding the particular formula that works was easy,
yeah,
someone would have done it a long time ago.
Sure.
And so I was like, I really felt that you had to like listen to the people who were there. And one of my favorite stories of the early days, I would go down, I'm a shy person, but I would make a point of going down to the cafeteria every day and just sitting down at a table and just talking to anyone who would talk to me. I was in the cafeteria and I had my tray and I was walking around and like someone came over and like tapped the tray and said like, is it go time? And I was so used to people leaving. I mean, Yahoo had experienced 24% attrition in the first 6 months of 2012 before I got there.
Wow.
Which means 1 in 4 Yahoos had walked out the door during those 6 months. And I thought the person was saying like, I'm leaving, like, and I was like, oh, please don't leave. And he's like, I'm not talking about leaving. He was like, look, there's a bunch of us that have been sitting here for years waiting for the board and management to like sort itself out.
Right.
And we all have our ideas about what Yahoo should be and what we should do and what would make us great again. And he's like, is it go time? He's like, can we just run and do what we think needs to be done in order to fix this company? And I was like, yes, by all means. Like, don't let me slow you down.
Please
right?
help.
Like,
Fast.
I was like, my job is to like get the things that are getting in the way out of the way and let the team run. So by all means, go time. Like,
that's so exciting. And I love the idea too of just being patient and respecting the intellect, and because so many people jump into new situations and assume that they have all the context. But it took about 90 days then, it sounds like, to get fully briefed on the situation, right?
Yeah, and also just understand like what are some of the best ideas that people have.
Yeah.
And what's already going well, what's been tried and isn't going that well.
Yeah. Especially too when I find anyways that oftentimes the shy people, the more introverted types, sometimes they have the best ideas, and it's just, creating that culture of getting people to speak up and sharing their ideas is pretty difficult. How did you go about making Yahoo into a meritocracy of ideas? Not saying that it wasn't before, but how did you maybe improve the information sharing amongst colleagues and executives? And yeah.
Well, I made a real point to, at each of the meetings, probably about the first 6 months of meetings, at the end of every meeting, doing around the room. And it was brisk, but, basically making sure that even somebody who'd been sitting there the whole time,
right, not
saying something, trying to understand, like, were they doubters? Did they agree with everything that had been said? And so making sure that you really sweep the room was something that was really important. But also, I think it's the David Kelly book, The Art of Innovation. He talks about in companies, there's information brokers and there's information fountains. And there's some people who are like, they get an idea or they hear about something and they kind of keep it to themselves and decide who they're going to tell, about this idea or
Sure.
about this work. And then there's other people who just spew their ideas, other people's ideas, just talk about them all the time because they don't care who picks up the idea and runs with it, right? They care more about it becoming a reality. And I tried to set a culture where at Yahoo, people understood that information fountains were going to be rewarded a lot more. And that kind of over communication that happens would be rewarded a lot more than information brokers. And this notion of just like, well, I've got this report, I've got this view.
Yes.
You can't see it. We started really stressing transparency. I mean, we did that we had a big meeting every Friday where for an hour we would go over all the upcoming unreleased products. And we'd also spend about a half an hour with my whole executive team there answering questions, whatever the company wanted to talk about, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it really, at first, was a very anxious moment for the company. Up until then, the company had a lot of leaks. And also, it was just something where they just hadn't really talked about that's not going very well or this is going really well. But, it really became a core staple ultimately of the culture. And I think that by giving people the access to and the responsibility of all that information, by the time we left, there were almost no leaks, right? There would be one a year, where it used to be multiple every day. And I think that was because people were wait, if the company will trust me with this kind of insight and this kind of information that it has to stay confidential, there was an implicit respect for that. And it really changed it. And also, once you get to a point where interests are aligned, people have access to the information, you really have achieved that new culture where people feel okay, I can, I've got a very sensitive piece of information or a sensitive detail. I can share it. It's not going to go anywhere that it shouldn't. It's going to be used in the right way.
That's really, really cool. I had no idea about all of that. But so during your tenure at Yahoo, we have a couple of the things that you achieved here, which is it's very, very impressive. There's roughly a 3 times stock price increase, around $43 billion of market capitalization was added. You added roughly 4 apps, Yahoo Finance, Sports, Fantasy Sports, became one of 3 internet companies with 1 billion users, a buyback of shares, roughly 27% of shares were bought back. And ultimately, you ended with a very successful acquisition to Verizon. How do you view your time at Yahoo?
Well, some of those things I'm very proud of. Some of those things I can't take credit for. So we do feel that, we were good stewards of capital. We had an amazing investment in Alibaba. Alibaba itself was a rocket ship. And
solid investment there.
And that was done by Jerry Yang, our founder. And, that really took Yahoo far and frankly gave us time. Right. That was really needed to try and rebuild the company the right way because of all of the different things that had happened over the years, all the CEO turmoil, the attrition, things like that. So, those are things I can't ultimately take credit for. I do think we did a good job. When I first got to the company, the reigning thesis was sell the Alibaba investment right then. In fact, as I joined the company, half of our investment was sold. And basically, probably, I haven't done the math lately, but probably left somewhere between $25 and $40 billion of value on the table through that sale, because our remaining stake, which was the other half, is today worth about 40. And we made about, I think, between somewhere in the order of $3 to $5 billion off of that sale. So it was meaningful for the company to do it at that time. But us really having a view that Alibaba was incredible and was going to become one of the reigning companies of the day was important, and being good stewards of capital in terms of when to do share buybacks, how to do it in a way that was really accretive to our shareholders and made a lot of sense. I feel like we did a good job on that. In terms of the core company, basically they had just missed mobile. And so I can't take credit for coming up with Yahoo Sports or Yahoo Finance or Yahoo Weather. Those all existed back from the 1999 days, but they hadn't made the leap to the phone. And if they hadn't made the leap in a coherent way where people knew it was Yahoo. There was no Yahoo Finance on the phone. There was something called Market Dash.
Right.
There was no Yahoo Sports on the phone, even though it's a beloved brand. There was Sportacular. And so we said, wait, we need to tie this back to the brands that people love from the web. And we need to get this working on the phone in native apps where people understand that this is both Yahoo and the things I do on the web translate to my phone and vice versa. If I follow a stock on my phone, it shows up on my watch list on the web, things like that, and really start to bring the company forward. And I feel like our strategy of moving into mobile, moving into native ads as the right way to monetize mobile. A lot of those calls using native apps rather than HTML5. Those were all decisions that we made very early without a lot of information. And history has now shown that they were the correct decisions, but they weren't obvious at the time. And I feel really good that we had a team that was able to look at those scenarios and pick the right mobile strategy.
So when you're making a decision like that is going against conventional wisdom outside the company, is there anything you look for or any tips you could provide to maybe the other startup CEOs or established CEOs that are listening to this to make better decisions, make bolder contrarian bets maybe?
Well, I think one of the things you want to do is you want to have a very good intuition for where industries are going, and that should inform your strategy. By example, when I got to Yahoo, it wasn't just iOS and Android. People forget in 2012, people were still developing for RIM and BlackBerries. People were still developing for Microsoft.
Sure.
Right? They were still developing for all kinds of different operating systems. Basically, I had the view that I was like, this becomes a duopoly. It's going to become an Android and an iOS world.
Right.
Try as the others might. And we should plan for that. And we should stop diverting development energy into these other smaller platforms. But further, if you say, wait, if we're really only developing for 2 platforms, you don't need to do things like HTML5.
Right.
HTML5 is an optimization that allows you to go to many platforms at once. If you say, look, we're really just building for these 2 because they're the ones that are going to matter, then you say, wait, we need to change our entire development strategy because HTML5, while it's very versatile across platforms, is sometimes slow. Mm-hmm. It's not as performant as native apps. And so, that was one of the key decisions that we made at the time. And Adam Cahan, who headed up my mobile group, and I made that together, and we had the same view. We were like, in the end of the day, there's 2 that will matter.
Right.
But if you take that thesis and extend it through your product strategy, you'd say, okay, then all this HTML5 development, and we had a big program called Mocktails, which was building APIs to make HTML5 development easier. You're like, that whole strategy is just wrong, right? And we've got to go native app, completely. And it's actually tractable to do if you're doing it on 2 platforms.
And it sounds like you're basically aware of the fact that if you're going to have a good partnership with somebody and they're a massive company, if they're growing a lot, you might want to invest a lot into those partnerships. So you were taking a posture, it sounds like, of betting on the winners early on.
You need to your point, you need to watch where the growth is. Because I would say that, interestingly, because Android and iOS were both growing so large, there weren't things, for example, like incentives being offered to develop on those platforms, where some of the other platforms were actually offering incentives, help from their team,
sure,
reimbursements for engineering time spent developing for those platforms. And so there certainly was a moment of wait, you essentially get development on these other platforms for free. Why not do it?
Right.
Right. And you'd be like, because it's actually going to cause us to make the wrong technical decisions. If we had kept trying to develop for 4 or 5 platforms, we would have developed in HTML5. But if you just say, wait, I understand I'm giving up potentially free labor and free product development here, but I'm going to be doing it because I ultimately will get my products onto much faster growing platforms. That's the right trade-off to make, even though it is, in essence, it costs you more.
Definitely. So what was the best lesson that you learned about time management and productivity at Yahoo? Because you were doing a ton.
I think that the biggest thing is prioritization. And you have to have a really clear sense of priorities overall. And so for me, it was really my family first and Yahoo. And I had to accept that anything else that actually managed to squeeze itself in, coffee with a friend, getting to go to someone's surprise party up in San Francisco, if that happened, it was like a ticker tape parade, right? Because most of those things, there was just no room for them. Family and Yahoo took up all the space. And so, if it was once every 6 months, I'd be like, wow, I could actually make this thing beyond Yahoo and family work. It was really, really pretty amazing. But at the same time, I was like, wait, my family is the most important thing. And having this big opportunity and this big set of responsibilities is by far the next thing.
Right.
And you're like, that might mean that some of these other things have to fall off, at least for now. And I think that's the right, when you kind of go back to basic priorities and principles, that's the right way to allocate your time. You have to say, look, you have to understand your overall responsibilities and how you want to prioritize them, and understand that, you can't do everything, but you've got to do the things that really matter to you.
And it's something too where you can circle back and catch up with people. Like friends are still going to be friends after your sprint or your marathon is completed, right? Did you circle back after that and kind of catch up with some people or?
I mean, certainly it's been nice to have some time post Yahoo, pre-Lumi,
Yeah.
where my dance card was a little bit less full. But I would say that basically people ask a lot about balance. And ultimately, in these kinds of roles and with new families, you're by definition out of balance.
Right.
And you have to be accepting of that, but just say like, yes, look, I'm out of balance right now, but I've got my priorities straight. I'm spending time on the right things.
I love it. So at Lumi Labs right now, you're hiring, the team's growing. Anything else that you're excited about? Any types of engineering talent or machine learning talent that you're looking for right now?
Sure. So as I said, we've hired about 12 people so far. So we're growing and we are hiring. We're hiring full stack engineers as well as machine learning engineers, and at all levels of experience. So we are hiring some new college grads and we are hiring experienced people in the industry. And so far it's been terrific. We actually, I think now have our engineering team has been roughly 50-50, 50% women, 50% men, and which is kind of funny
Congrats.
and nice because our founding team, my founder, Enrique Muniz-Torres, we're 50-50. And so the company's kind of grown in scale and in that proportion. But overall, it's been terrific. And we think that the culture's coming together really nicely. Everyone is to the point of like, life is too short to work with people who aren't nice.
Absolutely.
We've got people, who we really respect their abilities, but also they're nice, fun people to work with.
And how did you first meet Enrique? I think it was through work.
Enrique and I now have worked together. I was like, wow, we're really that old. But I believe I hired him 15 years ago, or 14 or 15 years ago. He was a new grad out of MIT, and I hired him into a program I ran at Google called the Associate Product Manager Program.
And how important do you think shared history with a co-founder is like that?
I don't know that it's hard to get perspective because it's the first company I've ever founded. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs over time. I've bought a lot of companies over time. And so I've seen a lot of different entrepreneurial relationships. But, for us, I will say it's nice because we do have a common set of experience. So there's a lot of conversations where I can imagine if you hadn't worked together before, it would be an hour long of you saying like, well, when I saw this happen at Google or when I saw this happen at Yahoo, this is how it ultimately played out.
Sure.
Where with us, we can just use shorthand. We're like, Google News. And he's like, exactly, right? Like we knew exactly, we know exactly what that means.
Right.
For a long time, one of my longtime managers at Google was a guy named Jonathan Rosenberg. And his father was a world famous economics professor at Stanford. And he said economists are like amazing because they argue. I don't know if this is true because I haven't been to these conferences, but Jonathan would go to these conferences and he'd be like, they argue by number. And he's like, there's basically about 100 or so economic arguments. And someone puts together a new economic theory. He's like, and everyone looks at it and thinks about it. And then they'll be like, 7. And then someone else will be like, I counter with 13. And it's sort of interesting. And like Enrique and I aren't quite that concise, but we have that same kind of shorthand where it doesn't have to be a long discussion or a long argument on things.
And that's energizing.
We can just talk, just be like, yeah, I've seen that situation before. Yeah. Like we know what to do and we don't have to spend a lot of time rationalizing it or discussing it.
Yeah, when you have that type of mind meld or whatever you want to call it, or camaraderie or rapport with somebody, it's almost like energizing. You can tackle bigger problems than you could with people that you don't have the history with. So what's your goal with Lumi Labs for next year? So if we were to fast forward to next Christmas, holiday time, New Year's, and if you're taking a moment to relax with your family, looking back on the year at Lumi Labs, what are you going to be thinking about that you've accomplished? What are you going to be most proud of?
Well, I would say at Lumi Labs, we're in a hurry. And Mickey and I both are very impatient people. We want things to happen quickly, but we also want to take a long view. So I'm not sure that 1 year is the right time period to look at it in terms of the lens. But I will say I hope that by this time next year, it's not called Lumi Labs anymore. That was always meant to be a working title. I hope that we've got our first products out, that we've renamed the company, that we're working on building out our product portfolio. I hope that, over the next year, we at least double in size, if not more than double in size. So, we have kind of an informal goal of getting to maybe 20 people by the end of this year. So I'd hope that we're kind of at about 2x that by this time next year. And I hope that our main objective, which is the objective of a lot of startups, but we really do mean it, is to change the world. We want to affect the lives of our users in a positive and profound way. It's been a privilege to work at both Google and Yahoo. And on the sale to Verizon, we had to try and summarize Yahoo's impacts, right? We knew that we were going to write this blog post that said the company had been sold. And we wanted to take and kind of encapsulate what Yahoo had been for people up to that time as part of that blog post. And so we had this major brainstorming session where we put all these different, like, people met and got married, right? People did this, right? Like, like all the different ways that people's lives had been touched. And we were trying to figure out, like, okay, how do you group these kinds of outcomes and these kinds of outcomes and, like, bullet point them into all these different sections of this blog post. And then suddenly someone just said, the simple point is that Yahoo's a company that changed the world and very few do. There's a lot of successful companies in the world, and then there's ones that really touch people's lives and change how people think and how they conduct their day-to-day lives. And, we really hope that Lumi Labs does something like that. But in that kind of goal, 1 year is too short to really measure it. The impacts are seen much, much, much later.
Very cool. So to finish things up here, start to wrap things up with the interview, we have a series of lightning round questions. So are you ready for them?
Sure.
Okay. Favorite book or books? Could be just a book you've read over the last year. Could
The
be
Design
the book
of Everyday Things by Don Norman.
Love it. What about apps? Any one or two apps on your home screen that you love?
I like Yahoo Finance a lot. I'm a prolific Uber user and was an early investor in Uber, and I think it's just a great service. But like both Yahoo Mail and Gmail, they're both on my home screen, and I prefer them to the native mail app that ships with the phone. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's others. I've been experimenting with different, like, family sharing apps. I used this little app called Path for a long time, but it recently shut down, and now I'm using one called Tiny Beans. I've been experimenting with that, but I really like, utility apps that help you get everyday things done. So I would say, mail, finance, news. I've been using Apple News in addition to Yahoo News a lot lately.
Apple News is pretty solid. It's
and
growing
Uber,
fast.
is how I generally get around.
Favorite album or playlist?
It's funny. I love music, but I have not been really constructing playlists. That said, my son has over the past 3 years built a playlist with his dad. And so I would say, like, now he's got a couple of playlists, but I think I like MZMB, which is like, those are his initials. And so, like, so there's MZMB and there's MZMB Disney or MZMB movies, I forgot what it's called. So I like his classic MZMB that has things on it like Wild Night and In the Jungle and all kinds of fun songs that we have a really fun time as a family, having like dance parties too. Yeah,
I love that. So if you do have time to put your feet up, are you watching a movie? Are you watching an original series on TV, or do you not watch TV?
I tend to watch, somewhere between like 0 and an hour a day. It's very rare that I watch more than an hour, but I have always liked kind of ensemble dramas. So I think, tons of people I watch Grey's Anatomy. So I've been with Grey's Anatomy for a long time. I've liked The Good Doctor the past two years. I also like This Is Us. Maybe because I have twins and there's triplets on the show. And so it's kind of interesting to think about the relationship among multiples.
Sure.
And, so I like those kinds of dramas overall. I also am really addicted. I just think like The Crown from Netflix is like one of the best television shows ever made.
Very cool. Marissa, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming in and taking the time. Is there anything that you wish people would ask you in interviews that I haven't asked that you want to share, or maybe that you just want to leave our listeners with?
No, I don't think so. Though I will throw in one plug because my day job right now is Lumi Labs.
Right.
And I am doing something small on the side called the Corner House.
Okay, cool.
And I basically bought a commercial facility a few years ago that operated until 2013 as a mortuary. It is, it's almost like, you're like, wait, like, what were you thinking buying a mortuary? But it's a great piece of land and a great facility right off of University Avenue. And I'm trying to reinvent it as a center for working moms, families, kids, after school enrichment, all of those kinds of things. And, that's something I'm really passionate about, is how can you be a resource in the community, bring families closer together. And, over the course of the interview, we've talked a lot about how do you integrate work and family life together. And I hope that side project, even though it's, it doesn't have the kind of global ambitions that Lumi Labs has, it's something that I think could be a great resource for the community, and hopefully will start off a trend. I'm finding there's people all over the world that are kind of attempting similar things, and we'll see sort of what comes out of that, which is exciting too.
That is. Marissa, this has been amazing. Thanks so much. And for everybody listening, they can find you on Twitter. They can find Lumi Labs, lumilabs.com. And the Corner House, is there a website or?
Coho. So we call it Coho for short. So coho.com.
Coho.com. Awesome. See everybody next time.
Thank you again to our friends at Salesforce. IT Visionaries is brought to you by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce, a leading cloud platform that makes building AI-powered apps faster and easier. With Salesforce, now everyone can build apps for their organization. Learn more at salesforce.com/buildapps.